Every time we step onto an airplane, we place our trust in a system. It's a system built not just on engineering and technology, but on hard-won experience. The safety regulations that govern modern aviation aren't just abstract rules created in a boardroom. Instead, they're a legacy, a solemn promise written in the aftermath of tragedy. Each procedure, every checklist, and all the rigorous training pilots go through can be traced back to a moment in history when something went terribly wrong. These rules are the lessons learned from aviation's darkest days, making sure that past mistakes are never repeated. Understanding this history is really crucial. It reminds us that the remarkable safety of air travel today wasn't just a given. It was earned through investigation, innovation, and a commitment to learning from failure. When we look at the story of major air disasters, we're not just revisiting moments of sorrow. We're uncovering the very foundation of the safety protocols that protect millions of passengers every single day. These stories are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and our collective ability to create a safer world from the lessons of the past. The aviation industry operates on a principle of continuous improvement. An accident is never just an accident. It's a data point in an ongoing quest for perfection. Investigators pore over every detail, from the smallest mechanical failure to the subtlest human error, to understand the chain of events that led to disaster. This meticulous process ensures that the causes are identified and addressed. The resulting changes, whether in aircraft design, operational procedures, or pilot training, become permanent parts of the aviation landscape. This essay will explore one of the most significant of these events: the crash of Air Florida Flight 90. It's a story of a winter storm, a series of critical errors, and a heartbreaking outcome. But it's also a story of incredible heroism and, ultimately, of profound change. By examining what happened on that cold January day in 1982, we can see exactly how a tragedy can lead to vital improvements that have saved countless lives in the decades since, reinforcing the idea that safety is a journey, not a destination. On January 13, 1982, a severe snowstorm blanketed the eastern United States. Washington, D.C. was hit particularly hard, grinding the nation's capital to a near halt. At Washington National Airport, later renamed Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, the conditions were treacherous. Heavy snow fell relentlessly, covering runways and forcing the airport to close for several hours in the early afternoon. Operations were a struggle against the elements. The snowplows worked tirelessly to clear the tarmac, but the sheer volume of falling snow made it a losing battle for much of the day. Air Florida Flight 90, a Boeing 737-222, was scheduled to depart for Fort Lauderdale, what now? Anstoby N for Amberfor all. Umberdendra Nawada. Its passengers were a mix of business travelers and vacationers eager to escape the bitter cold for the sunny shores of the South. But the weather had other plans. The flight was delayed for nearly 2 hours, as the airport and airline crews battled the worsening storm. The passengers waited, watching the snow pile up outside the terminal windows, unaware of the critical series of events that was beginning to unfold on the ground. The mood was one of impatience, not fear. The decision to reopen the airport was made as the snowfall began to lessen slightly. However, the temperature hovered right around the freezing mark, creating perfect conditions for ice to form on aircraft surfaces. For any flight crew, these conditions raise immediate red flags. Ice is a formidable enemy of aviation. It disrupts the smooth flow of air over the wings, reducing lift and adding weight. It can also interfere with the critical sensors that provide pilots with information about their airspeed and engine performance, making an already difficult situation even more dangerous. The crew of Flight 90, Captain Larry Wheaton, and First Officer Roger Pettit, were now faced with a complex challenge. They had to get their plane deiced, taxi to the runway, and take off safely before new ice could accumulate. The pressure was on. Delays were costing the airline money, and passengers were anxious to get going. This combination of severe weather, operational pressure, and the inherent dangers of winter conditions set the stage for a tragedy that would soon capture the nation's attention and change aviation forever. With the airport finally open, the focus for the crew of Flight 90 shifted to deicing. The Boeing 737 was coated in a mixture of snow and ice that had built up during the long delay. A deicing truck was called to spray the aircraft with a heated mixture of glycol and water. This process is designed to remove existing contamination and provide a short window of protection against further buildup. However, the procedure on that day was flawed. The desing crew used a mixture that was not calibrated correctly for the conditions, and they did not apply it according to the manufacturer's instructions for heavy snow. After the desing was completed, the plane was still not ready for takeoff. It had to join a long line of other aircraft waiting to depart. The taxi to the runway was slow and congested, taking far longer than usual. During this time, the snow continued to fall, and the protective desing fluid began to lose its effectiveness. The wings and tail of Flight 90 were once again being contaminated with a fresh layer of wet, heavy snow. The pilots could see the snow accumulating, but they made a fateful decision not to return to the gate for another round of desing. Inside the cockpit, the pilots had a conversation that would later be scrutinized by investigators. They discussed the ice buildup, but seemed to underestimate its severity. At one point, against company policy, they used the jet's own reverse thrusters in an attempt to push back from the gate, a move that likely blew more snow and slush onto the wings. This was a shortcut, born from the pressure of the delays, but it only made a bad situation worse. The critical surfaces of the aircraft were now compromised. The most significant error, however, involved the engine anti-ice system. This system is designed to prevent ice from forming on the engine's crucial sensors, specifically the probes that measure engine pressure and thrust. For reasons that investigators could never fully determine, the pilots did not turn this system on, either during their pre-flight checks or during the taxi. This oversight meant that ice was likely forming on the engine sensors, setting them up to receive dangerously inaccurate readings during the most critical phase of the flight, the takeoff. As Air Florida Flight 90 finally reached the head of the line for takeoff, the crew performed their final checks. Because the engine anti-ice system was off, the engine pressure ratio sensors were clogged with ice. These sensors tell the pilots how much thrust the engines are producing. With the sensors blocked, they gave a falsely high reading. The pilots, believing the instruments, set the throttles to what they thought was the correct power for takeoff. In reality, the engines were producing significantly less thrust than required for the aircraft's weight and the icy conditions. The plane began its takeoff roll down the snowy runway. It accelerated much more slowly than it should have. A pilot from another aircraft waiting nearby later reported that something looked wrong, noting that the 737 seemed to be struggling. Inside the cockpit, First Officer Pettit, who was at the controls, expressed concern. The cockpit voice recorder captured him saying, "That don't seem right, does it?" And that's not right. He was noticing that the plane was not performing as expected, and the airspeed was not increasing properly. Despite these clear warning signs, Captain Wheaton seemed to dismiss the concerns. He believed the sluggishness was due to the slush on the runway and trusted the faulty engine readings. The plane continued its agonizingly slow roll, using up far more runway than normal. It was a classic case of confirmation bias. The captain was seeing what he expected to see, an EPR reading that looked correct, and was ignoring the other cues that screamed of danger. The aircraft was not flying, it was just barely getting off the ground. The Boeing 737 finally lifted off the runway just a few hundred feet from the end, far too late and far too slow. It was struggling to climb. The ice on the wings was disrupting airflow, preventing the plane from generating enough lift, while the underpowered engines were not providing the necessary thrust. The aircraft's stick shaker, a device designed to violently shake the pilot's controls to warn of an impending aerodynamic stall, activated almost immediately. The plane was on the verge of falling out of the sky. The crew was now out of time and out of options. Less than 30 seconds after becoming airborne, Air Florida Flight 90 was in a desperate struggle for altitude. It was flying dangerously low, barely clearing the airport perimeter. The pilots fought to keep the nose up, but the combination of insufficient thrust and a stalled wing made the aircraft nearly uncontrollable. It was losing altitude, heading directly for the 14th Street Bridge, a major commuter artery connecting Virginia to Washington, D.C. The bridge was crowded with cars during the afternoon rush hour, their occupants completely unaware of the disaster unfolding just above them. The aircraft, descending rapidly, slammed into the bridge. Its tail section struck several occupied vehicles, shearing off the tops of cars and trucks and instantly killing 4 motorists. The impact was catastrophic. The plane shattered, breaking into large pieces as it tore through the bridge's concrete railing. For the people on the bridge, it was a moment of unimaginable terror. A normal commute home was suddenly transformed into a scene of fire. twisted metal, and chaos as a commercial airliner crashed directly into their path, bringing a horrifying tragedy to the ground. After striking the bridge, the forward section of the fuselage, including the cockpit and a large part of the passenger cabin, plunged into the freezing water of the Potomac River. The impact with the icy water was brutal, and the wreckage quickly began to sink. The river was choked with large chunks of ice, making survival and rescue incredibly difficult. For the passengers and crew who had survived the initial impact, a new and even more terrifying ordeal was just beginning. A battle against the lethally cold water. The scene was one of utter devastation. On the bridge, wreckage and burning fuel were scattered among the crushed cars. In the river, a small group of survivors clung desperately to the floating tail section of the plane, the only part of the aircraft that remained above the surface. Emergency sirens began to wail across the city as first responders raced to the scene, facing a complex and horrifying disaster site that spanned both a major highway and a frozen river. The full scope of the tragedy was just beginning to become clear. In the immediate aftermath of the crash, a desperate struggle for survival began in the icy Potomac. Only a handful of people had survived the impact, and they were now clinging to debris and water that was just above freezing. Hypothermia was an immediate and deadly threat. The official emergency response was underway, but the conditions were hampering their efforts. The ice on the river made it impossible for boats to reach the survivors quickly, and the chaos on the bridge made access difficult for land-based crews. Amid the official response, ordinary people became heroes. Lenny Skutnik, a bystander on the riverbank, saw one of the survivors, Priscilla Tirado, lose her grip on a rescue line and slip back into the water. Without a moment's hesitation, Skutnik dove into the freezing river, swam out to her, and dragged her to the safety of the shore. His selfless act of bravery was captured by television cameras and became one of the most enduring images of the disaster, a symbol of human compassion in the face of tragedy. Another hero emerged from the wreckage itself. A passenger, later identified as Arlen D. Williams Jr., repeatedly passed the rescue lines dropped from a U.S. Park Police helicopter to the other survivors. Each time the helicopter returned, he made sure someone else was saved before him. By the time the helicopter came back for him, he had succumbed to the cold and slipped beneath the water. He sacrificed his own life to save others, and he was posthumously honored for his extraordinary heroism. He became known as the sixth passenger. The helicopter crew, pilot Donald Usher and paramedic Gene Windsor, worked with incredible skill and courage. They hovered perilously close to the water in the bridge, lowering a rescue line time and again to pull the survivors from the icy river. Their efforts were the only reason anyone from the water was saved. In the end, despite these heroic acts, the toll was immense. The rescue was a race against time, a dramatic and heartbreaking effort to save lives in the most challenging conditions imaginable. The final count from the Air Florida Flight 90 disaster was grim. Of the 79 people on board the aircraft, only 5 survived. The 4 motorists on the 14th Street Bridge were also killed, bringing the total number of fatalities to 78. The crash sent shockwaves through the nation and the aviation industry. It was a high-profile disaster in the heart of the nation's capital, and the public demanded answers. How could a modern airliner simply fall out of the sky just moments after taking off from a major airport? The task of finding those answers fell to the National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB. NTSB investigators descended on the scene, meticulously recovering the wreckage from the frozen river. The cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder, the plane's black boxes, were quickly found and became the centerpiece of the investigation. The cockpit voice recorder provided a chilling, second-by-second account of the pilots' conversations, revealing their uncertainty and their fatal misinterpretations of the aircraft's performance. The flight data recorder provided the hard data, confirming the slow acceleration, low engine thrust, and the activation of the stall warning system. The investigation concluded that the probable cause of the accident was human error. The NTSB report cited the flight crew's failure to use the engine anti-ice system during ground operation and takeoff. This led to the ice-clogged sensors that gave false thrust readings. The report also pointed to the decision to take off with snow and ice on the wings, a direct violation of established procedures. Finally, it highlighted the captain's failure to heed his first officer's concerns and reject the takeoff when it was clear that something was wrong. The NTSB also identified contributing factors beyond the cockpit. They noted the prolonged delay on the ground after desing, which allowed new contamination to accumulate. They also pointed to the known inherent tendency of Boeing 737s of that era to pitch up, or lift their nose, when the engines were set to high power with a forward center of gravity, a characteristic that could worsen a stall. The investigation revealed a chain of errors, from procedures on the ground to decisions in the cockpit, that all linked together to create the disaster. The crash of Air Florida Flight 90 was a painful but powerful catalyst for change in the aviation industry. The NTSB's findings led to a sweeping overhaul of winter operating procedures. Airlines were mandated to develop more stringent and detailed desing and anti-icing programs. New standards were created for desing fluids and their application, ensuring they would be effective for longer periods in active snowfall. The rules around how long a plane could wait to take off after being desed, known as holdover times, were made much more scientific and strict. The investigation also put an intense focus on the human element of flying. The tragedy highlighted critical gaps in what was then called Cockpit Resource Management, or CRM. The failure of the captain to listen to his first officer's valid concerns was a textbook example of a breakdown in crew communication. In response, CRM training was dramatically improved and made mandatory across the industry. The goal was to create a less hierarchical, more collaborative cockpit environment where any crew member, regardless of rank, feels empowered to speak up if they see something wrong. Furthermore, the accident led to technical improvements. Aircraft manufacturers and regulators re-examined procedures for engine anti-ice systems, emphasizing their critical importance in icing conditions. Training programs for pilots were updated to include more realistic simulator scenarios involving winter weather takeoffs, contaminated runways, and instrument malfunctions. The goal was to ensure that future flight crews would be better prepared to recognize and handle the exact chain of events that doomed Flight 90, breaking the chain of error before it could lead to another tragedy. Today, when your flight is delayed for a second round of desing, or when pilots run through their extensive checklists, it is a direct result of the lessons learned from that terrible day in 1982. The 78 people who lost their lives did not die in vain. Their loss prompted a fundamental re-evaluation of safety, culture, procedures, and training that has made air travel significantly safer for everyone. It serves as a permanent solemn reminder that in aviation, safety is not an option, it is an absolute necessity, forged in the memory of those who were lost.